In terms of commodity, sir, I would like to ask about the crude palm oil. So crude oil, we consider it as a highly destructive because it creates large amount of greenhouse gas emission, and at the same time, it is why it is a threat as to global climate goals to achieve the global climate goals. However, in the other hand, we see that the climate crisis has in fact not dampened at all the thirst for demand of oil, especially when the world is trying to recover after the pandemics. What is your opinion towards this?
That is going to take time, definitely. There will be an energy transition. We will see through this century that this phase out from fossil fuel, but it's not going to be overnight. You can imagine, for instance, a transition in which coal is going to reduce. Natural gas probably will increase or stabilize. And maybe we will observe a peak on oil consumption, but afterwards, in the next decade, probably is going to decrease all the way to the middle of the century. So it's a long-term transition.
What do you think is a long-term transition?
But it's going to happen, and we need to think about it. And the sooner the better to be prepared and to foster that. But it's going to happen definitely. You should not have doubt about it.
In terms of coal, in terms of fossil fuels, there's a lot of opinion that fossil fuel, coals, and so on is actually the cheapest energy for the economic recovery, especially after the post-pandemics. What do you think about that opinion?
I disagree in the sense that we are not considering the secondary impacts and the externalities of fossil fuel. For instance, if you consider the economic cost, or let alone economic cost, which is high, the cost in terms of human lives and respiratory diseases, including cancer, pneumonias, for kids, for elderly people, for everyone, related with pollution coming from coal. So you will see the cost of that is so expensive. Yep. And even without considering these externalities, you can see in several countries, in several conditions, that renewable energy is as competitive, or even more competitive in some cases than fossil fuel. For instance, when I started the first solar facility in Mexico when I was president, it sounds like naive because the price of a kilowatt hour of solar energy, photovoltaic, was like $400 per kilowatt or per megawatt hour.
$400 per kilowatt.
Yeah, for megawatt hour.
It was in what year?
2010.
2010. All right.
Now the price could be 18, 20 as much. So the technology is advancing dramatically, and the cost for renewable is going down one day after the other. So the technology and the power of innovation is working on our side, definitely, and it's possible to do it. Even considering all those things, we need to think that it's not going to be enough if we don't change the pattern of consumption, if we don't speed up the transition in several countries.
And it's the best time to start now.
Yes, and to consider other alternatives as well.
Okay, to consider a little alternative as well. Still on the fossil fuel and the coal, you mentioned previously about a lot of social costs adding to not only the economic costs, but also social costs because of the fossil fuel and also coals. Learning from what you have seen in Mexico, and also as a lesson learned for our country in Indonesia, what are the impacts and a lot of economic costs of climate change of agriculturist countries like us?
Yeah, well, one example in Mexico City, for instance, talking about coal, there is a power generation plant facility close to Mexico City. Just restarting this power generation facility recently implies to increase the pollution in Mexico City, in a city with 22 million of inhabitants. It's very big. It's like Jakarta, probably a little bit bigger, I would say. So that implies that pollution, that we are losing roughly like 20,000 people a year.
20,000 people a year?
Premature deaths. Probably you don't realize that your grandfather suddenly had a heart attack and died.
Respiratory.
There are scientific research that they're demonstrating that a lot of premature deaths, that the name is, those are called, are associated with those peaks of pollution. So that's one example. The other, agricultural, for instance. Mexico is living a process of desertifications in the center to the north part of the country. So a very dry weather is becoming completely dry weather. And those regions with the extreme weather events, with rainforests, for instance, and floods, those extreme events are more frequent, are devastating, are damaging the people in their communities, but also damaging the agricultural sector. And the other way around, suddenly there are terrible droughts. We had last year the most severe drought ever in Mexico. And these kind of phenomena are going to be replicating more frequently and more in a more violent way with climate change.
In terms of climate change again, sir, because you mentioned it earlier, can you actually explain how could climate change policy can go hand in hand with a robust economic growth, especially for emerging countries like Indonesia or Mexico?
Well, in this sense, you don't need to increase dramatically, for instance, the investment for fostering economic growth. For instance, no, dramatically. For instance, the idea is instead to invest in an old coal power generation facility, you can invest in renewable power generation facility. And actually, if you consider the net present value of those investments, that yes, it could have at the beginning, upfront, bigger capital
expense, capital cost.
However, the variable cost is turned into zero because the wind and the sun, they have no price to say, they have no cost. So do you consider the net present value of that? It's profitable even compared with traditional fossil fuels investing. So the question is to make changes, but you can get fostering economic growth. Well, then let me give you one example, one more in talking about an economy like in the United States, because the debate is about the coal power generations and renewable generation. The coal power generation in the States, the people, especially in the last administration defending them, provided to the American economy like 80,000 jobs from the mine to the power generation facility. Only solar in the United States provided in the last 5 years more than 300,000 new jobs for the American economy. So the new jobs, what we are looking for, can come from the new economy. If you retrofit a building, an old building, for instance, in order to change the isolation of the walls or the windows, to modernize the air conditioning equipment, for instance, you can save energy, you can save money to your pocket, and it's gonna be a win-win situation in which you can pollute much less carbon emissions. You will emit much less, and at the same time you can get important savings that make rational decisions. So, and also you would provide jobs for the workers in that facility, etc. So, I think we need to explore and to see with new eyes the potentiality of the new climate economy.
So indeed, the only way for a robust economic growth for emerging markets or emerging countries in Indonesia is to see things from a new perspective and the new economy, a new cleaner, greener economy.
Definitely, yes, I believe so. And it is important to understand that the benefits coming from this change of perception and strategy, change of the kind of the investment we need to do anyway, one way or another. If we need to invest for new people coming to live in the cities, we need to invest for new people consuming electricity. Let's do it the right way from now. Instead to build more ways for car, for instance, invest in massive transportation system. We can reduce emission, we can provide comfort to the people, we can reduce the traffic, we can reduce the pollution coming from the car. But we need to switch the investment. No more elevated highways. No, we need to invest in massive transportation system, metro, BRTs, other ways, the pedestrian and any kind of social mobility. It's going to be an increase in quality of life, a reduction in pollution, a reduction in cost. So we can see win-win situations everywhere if we
win-win situation, a betterment, a sustainability for mother and especially for our future.
Better climate, better economic growth.
Better climate, better economic growth for the new economy. Cleaner, greener economy, sir.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for joining us here in CNBC Indonesia. Gracias.
De nada.
Gracias. Dan itu tadilah diskusi kami bersama dengan member of Climate Overshooting Commission dan also former President of Mexico, Mr. Felipe Calderon, di Prime Words CNBC Indonesia. This is in Vancouver.
Yeah, and we never experienced that. In Vancouver, some people have air conditioning, but when I grew up, we didn't need air conditioning because it was a temperate climate. You just opened the window. And what we find is those kind of temperatures kill people. We're not used to it. We've had terrible wildfires. We pride ourselves on our forests. As many parts of Indonesia are green and forested, and we think of them as absorbing carbon and making us healthy, etc. But when you have wildfires,